The United States built it, but now China is pulling the strings. One of the most crucial trade routes in the world has for years been quietly slipping into the hands of America's greatest strategic threat, all without a single shot being fired. This isn't just about trade, it's about power, control, and a sign of war between two powerful hegemons that could change the balance of global influence forever.
But that said, in All New at 6, we're taking a deeper dive into the extent of the Chinese espionage program on the ground. We found that all of Latin America and the Caribbean are target.
We are, of course, speaking about the Panama Canal, an 82-kilometer waterway that cuts through Central America and connects the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. A century ago, it was a crowning achievement of American engineering, a passage that shaped economies, connected continents, and secured US influence over global commerce. But today, something has changed. The canal is no longer just an engineering marvel, it's a battleground. And the fight isn't being fought with warships, but with cheap money, local influence, and quiet takeovers. And no country has played this game more effectively than China.
Because we're going to wake up one of these days and realize how close the Chinese and other adversaries are right across the river.
Since 2013, Chinese investment in Panama has increased over 1,100%. While Washington looked away, Beijing moved in. Control of the canal itself may be in the hands of Panama, yet through carefully placed investments, infrastructure deals, and political maneuvering, China has embedded itself deep into the canal's logistics, trade, and economy. Now, with the Trump administration having returned to power in 2025, the growing threat of Chinese control over this vital waterway has become a key geopolitical concern.
And above all, China is operating the Panama Canal, and we didn't give it to China, we gave it to Panama, and we're taking it back.
As China's influence cements itself across Latin America, the canal is more than just a trade issue. It's a test of America's ability to defend its strategic interests in its own hemisphere, and a reflection of the broader need to confront Beijing's expanding influence on the world stage. Over a century ago, the idea of cutting a waterway through Central America was nothing short of revolutionary. The journey between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans was long and treacherous, forcing ships to either round the stormy Cape Horn at the southern tip of America, or take a long and expensive overland route across the Isthmus of Panama. The French first attempted to build the canal in the 1880s, led by Ferdinand de Lesseps, the same man who successfully built the Suez Canal. But the project was doomed. Engineering miscalculations, financial mismanagement, and rampant tropical diseases like malaria and yellow fever led to a catastrophic failure, costing thousands of lives and leaving an unfinished ruin in the jungle. Then the Americans took over. In 1903, after backing Panama's independence from Colombia, the US secured the rights to build and control the canal. Under the leadership of President Theodore Roosevelt, the project was revived with a new approach, using locks instead of a sea-level canal to manage the drastic elevation changes. Over 75,000 workers toiled under brutal conditions, carving through mountains, diverting rivers, and battling disease. More than 25,000 lives were lost in the process. But in 1914, after a decade of relentless effort, Panama Canal was completed, a seminal moment in the history of global trade. For decades, the US controlled this vital artery of commerce, using it to project its power and influence. But that control didn't last forever. By the 1970s, Panama was growing increasingly resentful of American dominance over the canal, arguing that it was an outdated relic of colonialism. Pressure for control led to a historic decision, one that remains controversial to this day. In 1977, under President Jimmy Carter, the US signed the Torrijos-Carter Treaties, agreeing to transfer full control of the canal to Panama by the year 2000. The move was framed as a diplomatic necessity, a way to improve relations with a Latin America that was vulnerable to communist expansionism at the height of the Cold War. Carter argued that it was time for Panama to take charge of its own land, calling the handover a step towards fairness and stability in the region.
They mark the commitment of the United States to the belief that fairness and not force should lie at the heart of our dealings with the nations of the world.
But not everyone agreed. Ronald Reagan, then gearing up his 1980 presidential run, fiercely opposed the treaty. He warned that giving up the canal would be a strategic mistake, and one that the US would come to regret.
We cannot abdicate our responsibility for the operation of the canal and the security of the Western Hemisphere. Let us reject these treaties and negotiate as a great nation should.
His campaign rhetoric reflected the concerns of many Americans who saw the canal as a critical piece of national security. And Reagan's stance resonated with voters, fueling his rise to the presidency. However, by the time he took office, the treaty was already in motion. Fast forward to 1999, and the final handover was imminent. The Clinton administration upheld the agreement, formally transferring control to Panama on the 31st of December that year. But as the deadline approached, influential Republicans raised concerns. The fear wasn't just about Panama itself. It was about who might step in to fill the power vacuum left by the US.
Mr. Chairman, today the U.S. is faced with the possibility that the vacuum we are creating will be filled by a hostile power.
Even as the handover took place, warnings emerged about Chinese influence creeping into the region.
And unless we understand the strategic moves by China, we're going to be in big trouble within a short period of time.
The Clinton administration dismissed these concerns, insisting that Panama would act as a neutral custodian. But just months later, a Hong Kong-based company, Hutchison Ports, secured control of key ports at both ends of the canal. So why would China want the Panama Canal? When considering the importance of this dispute, it's crucial to remember the Panama Canal isn't just a shortcut, it's a lifeline of global trade. Nearly 5% of all world trade flows through this narrow passage. For the US, it's even more critical. 40% of American container traffic relies on it to move goods between Asia and the East Coast. But Beijing understands something crucial. Control over trade routes means control over economies. And by 2023, nearly 14,000 ships passed through the canal, carrying over 500 million tons of cargo, a significant portion of it linked to Chinese supply chains. To understand what could happen in Panama, we only need to look at what happened in Sri Lanka. In 2010, Sri Lanka, seeking to boost its economy, took out billions in loans from China to build the Hambantota port, an ambitious project that was supposed to transform the country into a global shipping hub. But the project never turned a profit. Sri Lanka struggled to keep up with the massive debt payments, and by 2017, drowning in billions of dollars of Chinese debt, the government was forced to hand over a 99-year lease of the port to a Chinese state-owned company, effectively surrendering control of one of its most strategic assets. What was once a sovereign piece of Sri Lankan infrastructure is now a foothold for Beijing in the Indian Ocean. The port sits along maritime trade routes, allowing China to exert influence over vital shipping lanes. And here's where it gets concerning. Sri Lanka's story isn't unique. It's part of a pattern of Chinese economic entrapment through the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, the question is, could the same happen to Panama? The US still has time to reverse the tide, but time is running out. If Washington doesn't act soon, it may wake up one day to find it has lost its backyard to China. The Panama Canal isn't just a trade route anymore. It's a geopolitical chessboard. A century ago, the United States built it, controlled it, and leveraged it for power. Today, China is buying, funding, and reshaping its future. And if Washington fails to respond, it risks losing one of the Western Hemisphere's most strategic assets to its greatest geopolitical rival. So, the next time a ship moves through the canal, ask yourself, is this still an American trade route, Or is it another step in China's silent conquest,